The hospital bed was empty. I stood in the doorway of room 314 at Banner Desert Medical Center, staring at the stripped mattress, the missing IV stand, the silence where my father's labored breathing should have been. My brother had texted me 2 hours ago saying Dad was sleeping, that I should take my time driving back from Tucson. But the nurse behind me was saying something about discharge papers, about a family member signing him out yesterday afternoon. While I was 3 hours away, closing the sale on my late wife's childhood home, the one we'd kept as a rental property for 15 years. The closing my brother had insisted I couldn't miss. I need to go back 4 months to explain how I ended up here. My name is Robert Brennan. I'm 62 years old, a retired firefighter from Phoenix Fire Department. Lost my wife Sarah to breast cancer 3 years ago. Our 2 kids live out of state, Jennifer in Seattle, Marcus in Boston. Both doing well, both busy with their own families. I'd made peace with the quiet life. Golf on Tuesdays, volunteering at the Fire Museum on Thursdays, visits to my father every Sunday afternoon. Dad was 84, living alone in the same house in Scottsdale where my brother David and I grew up. Sharp as ever, stubborn as hell. Refused to even discuss assisted living. "I'll leave this house in a pine box," he'd say. David and I had learned not to push. David's older than me by 3 years. We'd never been particularly close. He went into finance, made good money, got divorced twice, lived in Sedona with his 3rd wife, Linda. We'd see each other at holidays, Dad's birthday, the occasional phone call. Cordial but distant, the way brothers sometimes are when their lives don't overlap much. Everything changed on June 14th, 2023. Dad was leaving the grocery store when a pickup truck ran a red light and T-boned his Buick. The impact crushed the driver's side door. Fractured pelvis, broken ribs, collapsed lung, severe concussion. He survived, but the recovery was going to be long. The doctors said 6 months minimum, possibly longer. He'd need round-the-clock care, at least initially. I immediately offered to move into his house, take leave from my volunteer work, handle everything. But David surprised me. He called the day after the accident and said, "Rob, let me do this. You just lost Sarah. You're still processing that. You've got the rental property sale coming up in Tucson. I can work remotely, and Linda's a former nurse. We'll move into Dad's place, make sure he gets proper care. It's the least I can do." I wasn't around much when Mom was dying. That last part got me. Our mother had passed from Alzheimer's 7 years ago, and it was true David had been largely absent during her decline. I'd shouldered most of that burden. Maybe this was his way of making amends. "Are you sure?" I asked. "It's a big commitment." "I'm sure. You handled Mom. Let me handle Dad." I was grateful, genuinely grateful. The rental property situation in Tucson was complicated. The tenants were suing over mold issues, and I needed to be present for depositions, inspections, eventually a sale to just be done with it. Having David step up felt like a gift. He moved in within a week. Linda set up a hospital bed in the living room, organized Dad's medications, coordinated with home health aides. I visited twice a week, and Dad seemed to be recovering well. Slow, but steady. David would give me updates. He walked to the bathroom today with the walker. He's eating better. Physical therapist says he's making good progress. Around week 3, David mentioned Dad's finances. "Hey, the home health aides are expensive. Insurance only covers part of it. Dad's got savings, but I need to access his accounts to pay them. Would you be okay if I got power of attorney? Just temporary? Just for medical and financial decisions while he's recovering?" I didn't hesitate. "Of course. Whatever makes it easier." "Great. I'll have his lawyer draw up the paperwork. Just need Dad to sign it on a good day." 2 weeks later, David texted me a photo of the signed POA documents. Dad's signature was shaky but recognizable. I thought nothing of it. The Tucson situation dragged on. Depositions, mediation, more inspections. By September, I was spending 2 or 3 days a week down there. David kept reassuring me, "Dad's fine. Focus on getting that property sorted. We've got this handled." I trusted him. He was my brother. In early October, I noticed Dad seemed quieter during my visits, less engaged. When I asked David about it, he said, "The pain medications make him drowsy. It's normal." In late October, the buyer for the Tucson property finally came through. The closing was scheduled for November 8th, a Wednesday. I'd need to be there overnight, maybe 2 nights, to handle everything. David texted me the day before. "Dad's having a rough patch. Sleeping a lot. Don't worry, though. Nurses are monitoring. You go handle your closing. I'll keep you posted." I drove to Tucson on Tuesday, November 7th. The closing went smoothly on Wednesday. I texted David that evening. "All done. Heading back tomorrow morning." He replied, "Great. Dad's sleeping. Take your time. Traffic's bad in the morning." I decided to leave early anyway. Got on the road at 6 a.m., made good time. Pulled into the hospital parking lot at Banner Desert Medical Center at 9:15 a.m. And that's when I found the empty bed. The nurse, a young woman named Ashley, looked confused. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brennan. According to our records, Richard Brennan was discharged yesterday at 2 p.m. His son David signed him out AMA against medical advice. We tried to explain he wasn't ready for discharge, but your brother insisted he'd arranged private care at home." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, at home? David's been living with him. Why would he bring him back to the hospital in the first place?" Ashley pulled up the records. He was readmitted 3 days ago. Dehydration, malnutrition, possible medication error. The home health agency called 911 when they arrived for their shift and found him unresponsive. I steadied myself against the doorframe. 3 days ago? Why didn't anyone call me? Your brother said he'd handle notifying family. He's listed as primary contact. I tried calling David, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I texted, "Where's Dad? Why did you discharge him? Call me." No response. I drove to Dad's house. The driveway was empty. I used my key to get inside. The house was dark, blinds drawn. The hospital bed in the living room was gone. I walked through each room, calling out. Nothing. The home health aide schedule was still on the refrigerator, but there were no notes after November 4th. In Dad's bedroom, I found his medications, bottles and bottles, some empty, some full, organized, haphazardly on the dresser. I'm not a pharmacist, but even I could see the dosages didn't make sense. Some bottles had refill dates from just last week. Others looked untouched. I called the home health agency. The coordinator, Maria, sounded relieved to hear from me. "Mr. Brennan, thank God. We've been trying to reach your brother for days. Our aide found your father in severe distress on Monday. He was confused, dehydrated, looked like he hadn't eaten in days. We called 911 immediately. When we tried to call David to inform him, his phone was off. We've been leaving messages." "Where is he now?" I asked. "David checked him out of the hospital yesterday." There was a pause. "I don't know. Our service contract was terminated last Friday. David called and said they didn't need us anymore, that he'd hired private care. We tried to advise against it, given your father's condition, but he insisted. I felt ice in my veins. What private care? There's no one here." I don't know, Mr. Brennan. We weren't given any information." I hung up and called 911. The Phoenix police officer who responded was sympathetic but direct. "Sir, your father is an adult. If your brother has power of attorney and checked him out of the hospital, there's not much we can do unless there's evidence of a crime. He's vulnerable. He's recovering from a serious accident. And he's missing. Is there any reason to believe he's in immediate danger?" I thought about the medications, the dehydration, the malnutrition. "Yes. Can you file a missing persons report?" I did. Officer Martinez took down all the information. Dad's description, last known whereabouts, David's contact information. She assured me they'd start looking, but cautioned that adults have the right to move around freely, even when they're 84 and recovering from a major accident. Even then. But we'll do what we can. I spent the next 2 hours calling everyone I could think of. Dad's neighbors hadn't seen him. David's wife Linda's phone went straight to voicemail. David and Linda's house in Sedona, I called the property management company who handled it, and they said the Brennans had listed it for sale 3 weeks ago. That's when I started to panic. I went to Dad's bank, First National, I'd been there with him dozens of times over the years. The branch manager, Patricia, knew me. "Patricia, I need to check on my father's accounts. I think something's wrong." She looked uncomfortable. "Robert, you know I can't discuss a customer's accounts without authorization. I'm his son. And I think his other son, who has power of attorney, might be stealing from him." Her expression changed. "Wait here." She came back 10 minutes later with a printout, her face pale. "I'm going to need you to sit down." My father had 3 accounts at that bank. A checking account with about $8,000 normally in it, a savings account that had held around $145,000, and a money market account with $89,000. Those were his life savings, his safety net, the money from selling his business 20 years ago, and from Mom's life insurance. The savings account had $3,200 in it. The money market account had $1,100 in it. The checking account was overdrawn. "Where did it go?" I whispered. Patricia showed me the transactions. Starting in late July, regular withdrawals. $5,000 here, $10,000 there. Wire transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. The largest single transaction was on October 15th. $75,000 wired to an account at a different bank. "These are all authorized," Patricia said quietly. "They have the proper signatures and POA documentation. My brother did this. I can't confirm who initiated them, but they all came through the POA access." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Can you reverse them? If the POA was fraudulent, you'd need to prove fraud. And even then, if the money's been moved to other accounts, especially overseas, it's complicated." I left the bank in a daze. Nearly $250,000 gone, and my father was missing. I called the police back, told Officer Martinez about the bank accounts. Now she was interested. That changes things. "We can open a financial exploitation investigation, and with your father being vulnerable and missing, we can escalate the search." "What do I do? Do you have access to any of your brother's financial records, email accounts, anything that might tell us where he went?" I didn't, but I had a key to Dad's house, and David had been living there for months. I went back and searched. David's bedroom, the guest room he'd been staying in, was mostly cleared out, but people always leave traces. In the closet, I found a folder tucked behind some old linens. Inside were bank statements for accounts I didn't recognize, routing numbers to banks in the Cayman Islands, printouts of property listings in Costa Rica, a flight confirmation email, printed out, dated November 6th, Phoenix to San Jose, Costa Rica. November 9th, 2 passengers, David Brennan and Linda Brennan. Tomorrow. They were leaving tomorrow. I photographed everything and sent it to Officer Martinez. She called back within 20 minutes. "Mr. Brennan, we're escalating this to detectives. This looks like planned financial exploitation and possible elder abuse. We're issuing a bolo for your brother's vehicle. Do you know what he drives?" "A white Range Rover. 2021. License plate?" I looked it up on my phone from a family photo. Gave her the number. "We're on it. In the meantime, do not confront your brother if you find him. Call us immediately." But I wasn't going to find him, because I suddenly knew where my father was. David and Linda's house in Sedona. For sale, supposedly empty. The perfect place to stash someone you didn't want found. It's a 2-hour drive from Phoenix to Sedona. I made it in 90 minutes. The house was a beautiful adobe-style home in the hills, with a view of the Red Rocks. I'd been there once, maybe twice over the years. The driveway was empty, but David could have parked in the garage. I knocked. No answer. I tried the doorbell. Nothing. I walked around the perimeter. The curtains were all drawn, but at the back of the house, near what I remembered was a storage room, I heard something. A rhythmic thumping, faint but distinct. I tried the back door. Locked. I looked around for something to break the window, found a landscaping rock, smashed the glass, reached through, unlocked the door from inside. "Dad?" I shouted. "Dad? Are you here?" The thumping got louder. It was coming from below. The house had a basement rare in Arizona, but this was built into a hillside. I found the basement door. It was locked, with a deadbolt that required a key from both sides. The thumping was definitely coming from down there. "Dad, it's Rob. I'm here." I could hear a voice now, weak, hoarse, but unmistakably my father's. I searched frantically for the key. Kitchen drawers, bedroom dresser, everywhere. Finally found a key ring in a nightstand in the master bedroom. Ran back to the basement door. The third key worked. I opened the door and nearly vomited from the smell. Urine, feces, sweat, decay. I ran down the stairs. My father was on a mattress on the floor, partially covered with a dirty blanket. He was handcuffed to a metal support pole. A bucket next to him, overflowing. An empty water bottle on the floor. He was conscious, but barely. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His eyes were sunken. "Dad, oh my God, Dad." He looked at me like he wasn't sure I was real. "Bobby?" I tried to unlock the handcuffs, but they required a different key. I ran back upstairs, grabbed a fire extinguisher from the kitchen, came back down, and smashed the bracket, holding the chain to the pole. It took 6 hits, but it broke. I pulled the blanket around him and started carrying him up the stairs. He weighed maybe 130 pounds. He'd lost at least 40 pounds since June. "How long have you been down here?" I asked as I got him to the living room. "I don't days. Water. Tuesday, I think." Today was Thursday. He'd been without water for 2 days, maybe 3. The temperature in Sedona in early November was still hitting 70 degrees during the day. That basement would have been sweltering. I called 911 first, then Officer Martinez. The paramedics arrived in 12 minutes. They started an IV immediately, checked his vitals, loaded him onto a gurney. He's severely dehydrated, malnourished, possible kidney damage. We're taking him to Flagstaff Medical Center. Can I ride with him? Follow us there. As they were loading Dad into the ambulance, Phoenix PD and Yavapai County Sheriff's deputies were pulling up. Officer Martinez had coordinated everything. They wanted my statement, wanted to see the basement, wanted photos of everything. I gave them the basics and said I needed to go with my father. Martinez nodded. "We have enough to issue an arrest warrant for your brother. We've already contacted TSA. If he tries to board that flight tomorrow, we'll get him." I followed the ambulance to Flagstaff. Dad was admitted to the ICU. The doctor said he was in critical condition. Acute renal failure from dehydration, severe malnutrition, pressure sores from lying in the same position, possible sepsis from infected wounds. They weren't sure if he'd make it through the night. I sat in the waiting room and tried to process what my brother had done. He'd planned this for months. The POA was probably forged. Dad's signature might have been real, but I doubt he understood what he was signing. Probably drugged or confused from pain medications. David had systematically drained Dad's accounts. He'd fired the home health aides who might notice Dad was deteriorating. He'd taken Dad from the hospital when the readmission threatened to expose the neglect. He'd hidden Dad in a basement, handcuffed him, left him to die. And he'd planned to flee the country with the money. It was so calculated, so cold. This was my brother, the boy I'd played catch with in the backyard, the teenager who'd taught me to drive, the best man at my wedding. How do you become someone who does this? My phone rang around midnight. Officer Martinez. We got him. TSA flagged him at Sky Harbor. He and his wife were trying to board a red-eye to Houston, connecting to Costa Rica. We have them in custody. Both of them. I felt a wave of relief so intense I had to sit down. Thank you. We found $127,000 in cash in their luggage. We're getting warrants for their bank accounts. We'll recover as much as we can. Will it be enough to prosecute? Mr. Brennan, we have him on elder abuse, kidnapping, financial exploitation, fraud, and about 6 other charges. He's not going anywhere. Dad survived the night, and the next night, and the one after that. After 2 weeks in the ICU, he was transferred to a regular room. After another week, he was moved to a rehabilitation facility. The doctor said he'd have permanent kidney damage. He'd need dialysis eventually. The psychological trauma was harder to measure. He had nightmares. He was afraid of being alone. He didn't want to talk about what David had done, but sometimes, late at night, he'd cry and ask me, why did he hate me so much? I didn't have an answer. The investigation unfolded over the next 3 months. Detectives pieced together the full scope of David's theft. The total was $218,000. He'd transferred most of it to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, but the $127,000 in cash they'd seized, plus another $34,000 frozen in a domestic account, was recoverable. The rest was gone, hidden in accounts the U.S. couldn't easily access. The POA documents were analyzed. A forensic document examiner determined the signature was genuine, but testified that the circumstances suggested Dad had been under duress or impaired when signing. Dad's medical records from July showed he'd been on high doses of oxycodone at the time David had convinced the doctor. Dad was in severe pain and needed increased medication. Dad was probably barely conscious when he signed. David's lawyer tried to argue diminished capacity, mental health crisis, financial stress from his divorce, anything to mitigate. But the prosecutors had the flight to Costa Rica, the offshore accounts, the staged discharge from the hospital, the handcuffs in the basement. This wasn't impulse. This was premeditated. The trial was in June 2024. I attended every day. David wouldn't look at me. Linda, his wife, took a plea deal, testified against David in exchange for a reduced sentence. She claimed David had told her that Dad wanted to go to the Sedona house, that he was caring for him, that she didn't know about the handcuffs or the neglect. I didn't believe her, but her testimony was damning. She described how David had obsessed over Dad's money for years, how he'd resented that Mom's care had been expensive, how he'd complained that Dad should have saved more for his son's inheritance, how David had seen Dad's accident as an opportunity. He said it wasn't really stealing because it would be ours eventually anyway. He was just accelerating things. The prosecutor presented the financial records, the medical evidence of Dad's condition when he was found, photos of the basement, the handcuffs, the bucket, my testimony about finding Dad, about his weight loss, about the empty water bottle. The defense tried to paint Dad as having been confused, as having possibly asked to go to Sedona. They tried to suggest the handcuffs were to prevent Dad from wandering and hurting himself. The jury didn't buy it. Verdict came back after 3 days of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was 2 weeks later. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Barbara Hendricks. She'd presided calmly throughout the trial, but at sentencing, her voice had an edge. Mr. Brennan, you exploited your father's trust in the most despicable way imaginable. You stole his life savings. You endangered his life through deliberate neglect. You handcuffed an 84-year-old man to a pole in a basement and left him without adequate food or water. The only reason he's alive is because your brother found him in time. Make no mistake, if he died, you'd be facing murder charges. David's lawyer tried to interject something about David's remorse, his mental health, his willingness to make restitution. Judge Hendricks cut him off. I've seen the defendant's behavior throughout this trial. I've seen no genuine remorse. Only self-pity. The sentence of this court is as follows. 18 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections with eligibility for parole after 12 years. Restitution in the amount of $218,000, plus medical expenses incurred by the victim. And a lifetime restraining order you are never to contact your father or brother again. Linda got 6 years. She'd be eligible for parole in 4. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Dad moved in with me after his rehabilitation. He'll never be independent again. The kidney damage means dialysis 3 times a week. The psychological damage means he panics if he's alone for more than a few hours. I hired a caregiver to stay with him when I need to go out. He asks about David sometimes. Not often. Usually late at night when he's tired and his defenses are down. Have you talked to your brother? I tell him David's away. That he's dealing with some things. Dad doesn't push. On some level, I think he knows. I think he remembers. But it's easier not to say it out loud. We recovered $161,000 of the stolen money. The cash that was seized, the frozen account, and a partial recovery from one of the offshore accounts after a lengthy legal process. The rest is gone. Dad's house had to be sold to pay for his ongoing medical care. The proceeds Combined with what we recovered, will cover his needs for maybe another 5 years. After that, I don't know. My kids helped. Jennifer flew in from Seattle and stayed for a month when Dad first moved in. Marcus sends money every month to help with expenses. They've both told me they'll never forgive their Uncle David. I told them that's their choice to make. As for me, I don't think about David much anymore. When I do, it's not anger I feel. It's grief. Grief for the brother I thought I had, who turned out to be someone else entirely. Grief for the family that's irreparably broken. Grief for my father, who trusted his son and paid the price. But mostly, I focus on what I have. Dad's still here. He's frail, he's damaged, but he's alive. He smiles sometimes when we watch old westerns together. He tells stories about when David and I were kids, conveniently editing David out of most of them now. We go to his dialysis appointments together, grab lunch after at his favorite diner, come home, and sit on the porch in the evening. Last week, he looked at me during one of those quiet evenings and said, "I'm lucky to have you, Bobby." I told him I'm the lucky one, because in the end, that's the only justice that really matters. David's in prison, Linda's in prison, and they'll carry what they did for the rest of their lives. But Dad's here, safe, cared for, loved. He made it. We made it. And honestly, that's enough.